Have you ever felt that pang of loneliness? Even when you know deep down that you're not truly alone. It's a bit of a paradox, especially for people of faith.
Yeah.
So today we are going to take a deep dive into the Christian perspective on overcoming the fear of being alone.
Okay.
Our source material, a podcast episode aptly titled, How Can Christians Overcome the Fear of Being Alone?
It's interesting, isn't it? The source tackles this head-on, acknowledging that loneliness is something even deeply faithful people struggle with.
Right?
It doesn't sugarcoat it, but it also offers hope.
Yeah, I think that's what drew me to this particular episode. It doesn't shy away from the tension between knowing God is with us and still feeling that ache of loneliness. It's like, okay, God, I get it, you're here, but I still feel this void. Have you ever felt that disconnect?
Absolutely. And it's crucial to remember that we're wired for connection.
Right.
It's not a flaw. It's part of who we are. Even in Genesis, it says, it is not good that man should be alone. This isn't just some poetic flourish. It's a foundational truth about our human experience.
Right, and that's where this idea of divine connection comes in, something the source talks about quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's not just about having friends. It's about those relationships that seem to have a deeper purpose, a sense of being orchestrated by something bigger than ourselves. But how do we know if a connection is divine? What sets it apart from just enjoying someone's company?
The source points to a few key indicators.
Okay.
It digs into Proverbs 17.17, which says, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity."
Wow.
This isn't about those fair weather friends who are only there for the good times.
Right.
It's about the ones who show up with soup when you're sick, who celebrate your promotion like it's their own.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of deep, lasting relationships that can help us navigate loneliness.
That makes me think of, Sam and Frodo from Lord of the Rings, talk about going through adversity together.
Right.
But the source also says something that at first seems counterintuitive, that loneliness can be a good thing. I have to admit, that one threw me for a loop.
Think of it like this. Sometimes we need to step back from the noise and distractions of life to really connect with ourselves and with God. It's in those quiet moments of reflection that we can hear his voice most clearly.
Yeah.
Like that verse from Psalm 46.10, "Be still and know that I am God." It's not about seeking isolation, but recognizing the power of solitude for growth.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes you need to prune a plant back for it to grow stronger.
Exactly.
But the source also cautions against getting so fixated on ending loneliness that it becomes unhealthy.
Right.
It talks about this distinction between obsession and healthy desire, which feels really relevant to this whole conversation.
Absolutely. It's natural to crave connection, but when that desire morphs into a desperate need, it can lead us down some pretty unhealthy paths.
Oh, yeah.
We can start putting immense pressure on relationships to fill a void that only God can truly fill. It's about finding that balance between acknowledging the human need for connection and recognizing that our ultimate sense of belonging comes from our relationship with God.
So how do we do that? How do we walk that line between acknowledging the desire for connection without letting it become all-consuming? I know the source talks about trusting God's timing, which I think is a huge piece of this puzzle.
That's where that famous verse, Matthew 6.33, comes in. It says, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well."
Powerful.
The fear of being alone often stems from a lack of trust in God's plan.
Yeah.
But this verse reminds us to shift our focus.
Right.
Instead of obsessing over when we'll find that special connection, we can focus on building our relationship with God, knowing that everything else will fall into place in his time.
That's a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
But easier said than done, right? Especially when you're feeling that ache of loneliness.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm curious, what has your experience been with this? Have you ever struggled with trusting God's timing when it comes to relationships? And if so, how did you work through that?
Well, it's easy to romanticize the idea of finding the one,
Yeah.
but the source makes a really good point about the flip side of that longing. It's not just about missing out on romance. It's about the deeper fear of ending up alone, period.
Yeah.
And that fear, when it takes root, can be really damaging.
That resonates with me. It's like this underlying anxiety that whispers, what if no one ever chooses me?
Exactly.
And then you start making decisions based on fear rather than what truly feels right.
Exactly. And the source reminds us that God is not a transactional deity.
Right?
He's not waiting to bestow blessings only after we have jumped through certain hoops like getting married or achieving a certain level of success.
Right.
His love is unconditional,
Yeah.
and that's where true security lies.
It's about shifting our perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of seeing singleness as a waiting room for real life to begin, it's about recognizing the value and purpose of this season.
Yes.
I think that's where the source's emphasis on deepening our relationship with God comes in.
Absolutely. It's in those moments of solitude when we strip away the distractions and expectations that we can truly hear God's voice.
Yeah,
It's like tuning into a radio frequency that's always been there, but we've been too busy with other noise to hear it clearly.
that's a great analogy.
Thanks.
It reminds me of something the source mentions about solitude not being the same as loneliness.
Right.
It's about choosing to be alone for a purpose,
Exactly.
for prayer, for reflection, for simply being present with God.
Yes, and I think that intentionality is key.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about isolating ourselves out of fear or sadness, but creating space for that deeper connection with the divine.
So true.
And that's where some of the practical suggestions from the source come in handy.
Like what are some tangible things people can do to create that space for solitude and connection with God?
Well, the source talks about setting aside dedicated time each day for prayer and reflection,
Okay.
even if it's just for a few minutes.
Yeah.
It could be first thing in the morning, before bed, or even during your lunch break.
Gotcha.
The key is to make it a regular practice.
I've heard people talk about morning pages or journaling as a way to connect with themselves and with God.
Yeah.
Would that fall under this umbrella?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The source emphasizes that it's not about following a rigid formula, but finding what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's journaling, meditation, spending time in nature, or simply sitting in silence and listening, the goal is to create space for God to speak to you.
I love that. It's about meeting God where you are,
Mm,
not trying to force yourself into some cookie-cutter mold of spirituality.
exactly. And the source also talks about the power of community,
Okay.
even in the context of overcoming the fear of being alone.
That seems a little contradictory, doesn't it? Yeah. How can being part of a community help us overcome the fear of being alone?
It's not about negating the need for solitude,
Mm-hmm.
but recognizing that we're not meant to do life in isolation.
Right.
The source highlights the importance of finding a supportive faith community,
Right.
a group of people who share your values and can offer encouragement and accountability.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like having a safety net, knowing that even when you're going through a season of solitude, you're not truly alone. You have people you can reach out to, people who understand your journey.
Exactly. And that sense of belonging, that feeling of being seen and supported, can be incredibly powerful in combating the fear of being alone.
So we've talked a lot about the spiritual side of this,
Yeah.
but what about the practical steps we can take in our everyday lives to address this fear?
Well, the source reminds us that sometimes the fear of being alone stems from a lack of self-sufficiency.
Mhm.
We become so reliant on others for our happiness or validation
Right.
that the thought of being alone feels terrifying.
That's a really good point. It's like we outsource our sense of worth to other people, and then we panic when we're left to our own devices.
Right, and that's where developing practical life skills can be incredibly empowering.
Okay.
Things like learning to cook, manage our finances, or even fix a leaky faucet can give us a sense of agency and confidence that can help alleviate that fear.
It's about reclaiming that sense of independence, knowing that we can handle things on our own, even if we don't necessarily want to be alone all the time.
Exactly. It's not about becoming hermits, but building a solid foundation of self-sufficiency that allows us to navigate life with greater confidence and peace, whether we're in a relationship or not.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to personal growth.
Yeah.
I love that the source encourages this holistic view, addressing both the spiritual and practical aspects of overcoming the fear of being alone.
And it also highlights the importance of shifting our mindset
Okay.
instead of focusing on what we lack. It encourages us to cultivate an attitude of gratitude for the blessings we already have.
That's a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get so caught up in what we don't have that we fail to appreciate the abundance that's already present in our lives.
It's like that saying, comparison is the thief of joy.
Oh, I like that.
When we're constantly comparing our lives to others, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment and discontent.
So how do we break free from that comparison trap and start cultivating an attitude of gratitude, especially when we're feeling that ache of loneliness?
The source suggests starting each day by acknowledging the good things in your life,
Okay.
even the seemingly small things.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as a warm cup of coffee, a beautiful sunrise, or a kind word from a stranger.
It's about training ourselves to notice those little glimmers of joy that are often overlooked.
Precisely. And as we cultivate that sense of gratitude, we begin to shift our focus from what we lack to what we have.
Yeah.
And that can have a profound impact on our overall well-being.
It's like we're rewiring our brains to see the good instead of fixating on the negative. And that, in turn, can help us approach relationships from a healthier, more grounded place.
Absolutely. And speaking of relationships, the source makes a really interesting distinction between simply wanting companionship and truly valuing the unique qualities of another person.
I'm curious to hear more about that. What's the difference there?
It's easy to fall into the trap of wanting anyone to fill that void of loneliness.
Right.
But a divine connection, as the source describes it, goes way beyond that.
Okay.
It's about recognizing the inherent worth and beauty of another person, appreciating them for who they are rather than what they can do for us.
So it's not about finding someone to complete us,
Right.
but about finding someone who complements us, challenges us,
Yeah.
helps us become better versions of ourselves.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the spark of the divine in another person, seeing them as a reflection of God's image and cherishing that.
That's beautiful. But honestly, it also feels a little daunting.
Yeah.
How do we develop that kind of discernment, that ability to look beyond the superficial and recognize those deeper connections?
The source reminds us that discernment is a gift from God,
Okay.
and it's something we can actively cultivate through prayer.
Yeah.
It's about asking God to open our eyes to help us see the people He's placed in our lives, even the ones we might overlook at first glance.
So it's not just about going out and searching for the one,
Right.
but about being open to the connections that are already present,
Yes,
trusting that God is at work in the midst of it all.
precisely.
Yeah.
And sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected places.
Yeah.
It's about letting go of our preconceived notions and being open to the surprises God has in store for us.
It's like that saying, God works in mysterious ways. We think we know what we need, who we're supposed to connect with, but then life throws us a curveball, and we end up finding something even better than we could have imagined. This episode has been so insightful. We focused a lot on overcoming the fear of being alone. But the source also acknowledges that solitude can be a blessing.
Yes.
It's almost like there's this dance between seeking connection and embracing solitude. How do we find that balance?
That's a great observation, and it's something the source delves into as well.
Okay.
It reminds us that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing.
Okay.
Loneliness is a feeling of isolation and emptiness, while solitude is a chosen state of being alone for a purpose.
So it's about being intentional about our time alone.
Yeah.
Using it for reflection, for connecting with God, for recharging our batteries, rather than letting it become a time of wallowing or self-pity.
Exactly. And the source even suggests practical steps for cultivating that healthy solitude.
Okay.
It talks about setting aside dedicated time for prayer and reflection, maybe even taking a retreat or spending time in nature.
Yeah.
It's about incorporating these practices into our rhythm of life, recognizing that both connection and solitude are essential for our well-being.
It's like finding that sweet spot,
Yeah.
that balance between being engaged with the world and taking time to retreat and recharge.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's not about swinging between extremes of constant social interaction and total isolation, but finding a rhythm that honors both our need for connection and our need for solitude.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are you walking away with? What feels like the most impactful takeaway for you?
For me, it's that reminder that even in the midst of our deepest fears, even when we feel most alone, God is with us.
That's good.
And it's in those moments of surrender, when we let go of our need to control everything, that we can truly experience the depth of His love and faithfulness.
That's beautifully said. And for me, it's that sense of hope. This episode isn't just about overcoming the fear of being alone. It's about embracing the fullness of life, with all its seasons and complexities.
Yeah.
Trusting that God is with us every step of the way.
And that's a truth worth holding on to.
Absolutely. So to our listener, we leave you with a final thought. The source we've explored today suggests a variety of practical steps for overcoming the fear of being alone. If you had to choose just one to focus on today, which would it be and why? We encourage you to ponder that question and see where it leads you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
And we look forward to exploring more together soon.